Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I'm so happy to be here. Um, and I'm a parent just like you. So I hope that you know that I'm coming from this from a professional standpoint, but also as one of you. So I'm going to hopefully be able to present in a really conversational way today. And if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand if something feels confusing or if something applies specifically to you and you'd like to share. This should feel like an open forum and conversation. Um, it's hard to remember those questions after the fact, right? We feel like we feel them in the moment. Um, I will be using the word caregiver and parent interchangeably. Just know that I'm talking about you and whoever you are taking care of in your home or outside of your home. Okay. So before I really introduce myself, I want to talk a little bit about what's over on our left, which is called the learning tree. And this was developed by Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and we'll talk about him probably later. But this is going to be the guide that is facilitating us through the rest of the presentation, which is looking at your child as this beautiful tree. And their needs that they have: warmth, food, shelter, safety, regulation. That's all the roots. And that is what holds our tree firmly in the ground. Once we can have an established root system, then we can move up to the trunk, which is our developmental capacities. And that's just where your child is at developmentally with how they're able to communicate and relate to themselves and their peers in the world around them. If we can have the roots and the trunk, then we can have foliage, and the leaves are the higher level skills that your children can acquire if they have a solid base. And once those are able to be achieved, then there's fruit. And that fruit is often what parents come to me and say, this is what I want. And they say, help me with my kid at school. Help me with my kid to learn this. These are the skills that we want to gain. And I have to always remind them that fruit can't come if there's no tree. And a tree can't come if there's no roots. And what's most important about this is that none of that can happen if there's no sunlight. And you, as caregivers, are that sunlight. You are feeding the tree, allowing it to grow and to flourish and to fruit. So today, as we're moving through this, remind yourself that the conversations we're having about regulation and the relationship between you and your child is that sunlight that is feeding this tree. Okay. I like to just talk about neurodivergence in general before we get into myself and my story, because I'm going to use that term a lot when talking about my story and who I am. And neurodivergence is an umbrella term for the different ways that our brains process information differently. In the disability world, we like to view neurodivergence as a difference, not a deficit. That doesn't mean that there are not things that children struggle with and quality of life issues that neurodivergent people don't experience. But it doesn't mean that their neurodivergence is inherently bad. It's just a different way that their brain works. And so under that umbrella, the main ones we're going to be talking about today, because they tend to be the ones that I focus most on my day-to-day in the clinic, are autism spectrum, ADHD, twice exceptionality, and anxiety. When we are discussing autism spectrum, we're talking about children that have social communication deficits, sensory differences, and restrictive and repetitive behaviors. So that's what qualifies autism. ADHD is variable attention, impulsivity, and executive functioning difficulties. Also motor and motor planning. We'll talk about that later too. Twice exceptionality, you maybe have not heard of this term before, but I bet you it applies to a handful of your kids, which is having one of these neurodivergence that are underneath of this umbrella, in addition to giftedness. And giftedness would be a higher cognitive ability than the norm. And twice exceptional kids are really interesting because of the duality and the juxtaposition of the neurodivergence and the giftedness. And then anxiety. So many of these kids are experiencing anxiety as a comorbid symptom with part of their neurodivergence. And sometimes that is the child's neurodivergence, is that anxiety that they present with at birth. Questions about neurodivergence. Do we feel comfortable with what it means? And when I say that, we're going to know what I mean. Okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I think it's so important before we get into this topic. That's my beautiful family. I'm Abby. That's my husband, Patrick. He's in the back. He's my support system tonight. And this is like a date night for us, right? Like no kids. It doesn't matter what we're doing. This is relaxing for us. And then our 2 kids. So that's Charlotte. We call her Charlie. She is 6. And that's Palmer. And he's 3. This was us just a few weeks ago. If you can tell, I'm a little tan. And that's because we were in Hilton Head. It is something we do not do often, is go on vacation. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And vacation with children with different needs is a unique experience too. But it was wonderful. And so I thought, perfect picture to throw up there since it was so recent. Actually, I have a picture in my office and it only has one of my children in it. I'm like, I need to update that. I have a whole nother kid that makes our family. We also, not pictured, have an adoptive daughter who's 22, and she is level 1 on the spectrum, and she lives with us at home. So we are experiencing neurodivergence in a 6-year-old, maybe in a 3-year-old. Jury's still out on him. And then really what that looks like at 22. And I think somebody had a question about failure to launch, and I'm happy to talk about that because I'm living it too. So our story really began when we had our first daughter. My husband and I have been together since we were in high school. I specialize in, my background is in speech pathology. My master's is in early intervention. I have a couple minors in psychology and disability studies and community inclusion and nonprofit studies. And so I thought, I'm going to be a great mom. This is going to be easy for me. Patrick, you married the right girl because I know what I'm talking about. And then we had our first daughter. I have an autoimmune disorder, so she was born premature. And that was a whole different experience than what I thought it was going to be. And she had some medical complexities post-birth. And then the pandemic happened and shut the entire world down. Which I'm sure many of you, since we've had these conversations a little bit before, know exactly what that's like. And so my entrance into motherhood was really a traumatic entrance into motherhood, and in isolation, something that I was not prepared for. And in this isolation, we found out that our daughter was really anxious. And she eventually was diagnosed with something called selective mutism, which is an anxiety disorder where in any situation outside of our home, with anybody outside of my husband and I, she was completely mute. She would not speak or communicate. And we looked at each other like, what are we supposed to do? We didn't think that this was going to be our kid. I thought I had all the answers, even if this was going to be our kid. And so I quit my job at the County Board of Developmental Disabilities as a developmental specialist because of my health issues and the pandemic happening, but also because of what I know early intervention. I know how crucial that time is to be with her. And I was like, I'm going to fix her, right? And little secret, that's not how any of this works. And so I put all of my energy into taking her to the right doctors, meeting the right people, going to the right therapies, doing all the stuff at home. I thought I could buy this Instagram online sleep course that we spent $3,000 on and did not help us with sleep, right? And I burnt myself out. I was so tired and overwhelmed and dysregulated. And my husband looked at me and he goes, I think you need to see somebody. I don't think you're doing very well. And so I'm sure you can relate to that experience. And so I did. I went and I saw a provider, and they diagnosed me with ADHD and anxiety. And I'm one of those girls that I was talking about a little bit earlier, where it just wasn't caught until the demands of life were presenting upon me more than I could handle. I was a gifted kid as well. And so I got ushered through education as like, oh, she knows what she's talking about. She's a good listener. And even though I was fidgety and had a hard time and was biting on my pencil all the time and spoke up in class too much and was always getting in trouble for talking to my peers, I was pushed to the side a lot. So motherhood really illuminated my own neurodivergence. It was like holding a big fat mirror up to my face and going, Abby, you're projecting all of these things onto your child, right? Your child isn't somebody to fix, she's somebody to understand. And so then I decided I need to go back to work. I need to do something for me a little bit. And I need to use my brain not just on trying to fix my child, but in trying to understand her a little bit more. So I then worked at Akron Children's Hospital. As a parent coach, and I did the autism assessment process, doing the ADOS, and did play-based therapy. Welcome, come on in. You're fine. I did that for 5 years. Loved it. But what I will say is that we're going to talk about the different types of intervention for autism and for neurodivergence today. But I found that the medical system doesn't always support our kids in the ways that it should. Because I supposedly specialize in a lot of this, and there was still no space for the kid that I had. So in talking about my family, I want you to know that I've lived it, that I continue to experience it, and that I think I found a really good way to help support you because I've seen this work in my own life. So, if you have a child that has had difficulties with behaviors, you have probably been presented with the option of ABA. I'm trained in ABA. I was trained in it in grad school, and I thought it was the answer. And what ABA is applied behavior analysis. It looks at a child's behavior and it tries to reinforce a new behavior or extinguish a behavior that you do not want. And it works. It's evidence-based. It does. It works. It's about skill acquisition and behavior change, and it really is adult directed. What do we want our child to do? And I had tried that with my child and was met with a lot of resistance, met with tears, met with frustration, met with it then impacting our relationship. And it didn't feel good. It didn't feel right to me in my mom brain and in my mom heart. And so I was at Akron Children's, and I had the amazing opportunity to be trained in something called Floortime. And Floortime is an intervention that falls into the category of a DRBI, which is a developmental relationships-based intervention. And I went and was trained for about a year to understand the intervention of Floortime as an alternative to ABA to help children with communication skills and behavioral skills. Play, too. So Floortime, or DRBIs, there's a few others, really focus on building intrinsic motivation, following the child's interests, using their behavior to understand their needs, and to really connect with your child to help with emotional growth, regulation, and connection. I love PlaySpark. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of them, but they're an advocacy group. I'm wearing one of their shirts today. And they're mom-owned and OT-owned, and they're fabulous. And I'll share a few different graphics along the presentation. One of them is the one that you're seeing to the left, which is what's the difference between play in therapy and play as therapy? Because a lot of parents will go searching for ABA because it's what their insurance can cover. And then they go, well, I only want to do it if it's play-based. And a lot of ABA places will say it is play-based. But what I will say as somebody who was in it, it's not play-based. It includes play. So play is used as a reinforcer. We can play with your favorite toy if you do this thing. It targets specific goals in play, like stacking blocks or doing puzzles. And then all of the data is collected to help modify. First you get this, then you get that. Play as therapy is what a DRBI or Floortime would be utilizing. So connection is the reinforcer. Learning targets play being embedded, and data collection is gathered from the interactions that you're having with the child that you're working with. So that's really the main difference between the two, the traditional model and the model that I'm proposing today, which is a DRBI. Any questions about those?
A parent asks if Abby can say more about some of the controversy surrounding ABA historically.
The negative connotation that is come alongside ABA has to do with adults on the spectrum who experienced it as children and felt like it was harmful. Felt like all the things that they loved were being taken away from them. They only got the things they wanted when they did the right thing. It was very compliance based. Now, ABA has changed. Back in the day, children would be dropped off for 40 hours a week of ABA. In fact, when I was at the hospital, when we would give a diagnosis of autism, you were supposed to prescribe an amount of hours for ABA. So I had kids that would get diagnosed with level 3 autism, and the prescription would say 40 hours a week of ABA. And so what we know about child development is that a child doesn't learn that way. A child doesn't learn from going to a full-time job. A child learns in their home with the people that love them, in play. That's how they learn. That's how their brains were wired to be. So I think that ABA has shifted away from the dropping your kid off for 40 hours a week. And ABA is including more play. And so it's not as harmful as it maybe was 20 years ago. But the people who now have the voice to share what their experience was have said that it was pretty harmful. That doesn't mean, again, that it doesn't work, because it does. And if I'm being blunt, like it works the same way that dog training works, right? And so you can train anything to do anything if you find the right reinforcer for it. So there is then the other controversial view, which is, if those adults didn't have ABA, would they then have the language to even be able to say that it was harmful? So I think it's all about understanding your child, what you want to bring to the table, and what fits for your family too, because not everybody has the luxury of being able to provide these services in their home, or to be able to go to a private clinic, and all they can do is find a provider that their insurance covers. So I think there's privilege with the ability to make the choice between ABA and a DRBI, but that's the controversy that surrounds it. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Did you have a question? Oh, yeah. Developmental relationships based intervention. You're good. You're good. Okay. So if you take anything away from the conversation that we're having today, I want it to be what Dr. Barry Prezant says, which is all behavior is a form of communication. I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to have you say it back to me, because I want you to know what this is, all right? So all behavior is a form of communication. Yes. So parents will tell me all the time, I don't know why they're doing this thing. This behavior came out of nowhere. It doesn't make any sense. And I tell them they're trying to tell you something. They're communicating something. Every behavior is the child's best attempt to communicate an unmet need, an overwhelming experience, or a deficit in support. And so when these behaviors are occurring, we need to look back at our son and go, what can we better do to help provide nourishment for our tree? Okay. I tell parents a lot to get curious rather than furious. Don't be mad at the behavior. Start questioning what's going on inside of our child. What are they trying to tell me? Behavior is not something that we should be rewarding away or managing or correcting. It's something that is a form of communication. And that's the old lens. That's the ABA lens. That's the new lens. And what the research is showing us. This is all evidence-based, by the way. Okay, so all behavior is a form of communication. There will be a quiz afterwards. In our clinic, and I'm happy to share more about exactly what we do at Purposeful Growth and Wellness. Actually, the owner of our practice is in our midst. As a mother of her own, she has 2 neurodivergent children herself, and that's actually why we exist the Neurodivergence Discovery Clinic, why we exist under Purposeful Growth and Wellness. But we exist because we believe in a systems approach. So if we are going to help support the child, we need to support the family, which is supporting the whole system. And we can't help our children if we don't help ourselves as caregivers. It's like so much like the proverbial example of flying on an airplane and getting the mask and putting it on yourself before you put it on the person next to you. You as parents and caregivers carry the emotional weight of your child's world, and your nervous systems matter too. And so Floortime as an approach, or these DRBIs, or what we do at PGW, is making sure that we're supporting the whole system and not just taking you in and out of a clinic room. That's what's called the medical model, which is what we see here in America. You'll see over here another beautiful image from PlaySpark, which is the duality of raising a child with a disability, the strength coming with vulnerability, patience and urgency, hope and uncertainty, compassion and frustration, progress and plateaus, and energy and exhaustion. With a raise of hand, how many of us feel these things on a daily basis? Yeah. The big one for me is patience and urgency. I really struggle with that, especially because of my own neurodivergence. I feel like everything is an emergency. And so I'm really working hard, and I've been working hard this last month to remind myself, this is not an emergency, Abby. You are just putting the dishes away. It will be okay. And then with my patience and urgency, I see progress with my kids and then plateaus. And that's hard. So the show of hands in the room should let you know that you're not alone in what you're experiencing. So supporting the whole child means supporting the whole family. These two truths are inseparable. Okay, so now I'm going to get nerdy on you guys. And you are each in a different phase of your journey with having a child with a difference, right? And so some of you may be still trying to understand what your diagnosis is. And if you have those questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I want to talk about a topic that's a little bit high level because it matters a lot. And you've probably not heard this topic a lot. So we're going to talk today about regulation. And if we want to get to regulation, we have to talk about our ANS, which is our autonomic nervous system. So the ANS is the part of our nervous system that controls all the automatic functions that our body does without thinking. So think heartbeat, digestion, breathing, sweating. We don't have to think about doing those things. They happen, right? It's how our body responds to the world, keeps us safe and healthy. So if you hear me say your autonomic nervous system or your ANS, this is what we're talking about. Okay, so in discussing regulation, we need to understand the two parts of our autonomic nervous system, which is our parasympathetic nervous system, which allows us to rest and digest, to calm our body after stress, to slow our heart rate, lower our breathing, and really what helps us feel safe and grounded. He's great. I love the parasympathetic nervous system, but usually I feel like the one that's being activated in me is the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response that we experience when we feel like there's a threat. Okay. And a threat doesn't always have to mean a tiger crashing through the window and trying to eat you alive. That's really not what we experienced in the 21st century in America. But our ancestors sure experienced some of those things. And so our bodies have learned to protect ourselves through these measures of the sympathetic nervous system. And that could be a threat of you not getting the IEP for your kid. That could be the threat of you trying to put them down to bed and them not being able to sleep without you. That could be the threat of them making a crazy mess in your living room. Those are all lived threats that we feel on the day-to-day basis. Or not getting bills paid, feeling like we're having to navigate insurance. Those are the threats I'm talking about. Even the threat of our kid crying and screaming and really needing something in the moment. So our nervous systems react for fight, which is making you want to attack or be aggressive or yell. Flight, running away, just feeling like you need to flee and get out of the current situation you're in, freezing, dissociating, shutting down, feeling like you need to just go in your bed and lay there. And then fawn, which is fixing it. It's what I was doing with my daughter when I was going through this experience. Makes you want to avoid and diffuse the situation and please the people around you. How many of you have experienced the sympathetic nervous system in action as a parent? Can you raise your hands? Okay. Yeah. So if you haven't, that's amazing. These are also happening in your child. So when we see behaviors, usually it is a response of an unmet need, or they're, again, communicating something. So if it's an unmet need, I'm sure it probably relates to this a little bit. Questions about our nervous system and how we react to perceived threats. Okay. So I'm going to use the term regulation a lot today. And regulation is our body's ability to coordinate all of the stuff we just talked about with our ands, with our nervous systems. How are we able to keep it all in and hold it together? There is a researcher that talks about the hand model of the brain. And so up here is your upstairs brain, your prefrontal cortex, the decision making that's happening on your day-to-day. You have logic, empathy, planning, decision making. That's all super important for the fruit of that tree, right? You can't get the fruit if you don't have the upstairs brain working. But what keeps the upstairs brain working is the downstairs brain, which is my thumb. And that's our brain stem and limbic system. That's our survival engine. That is the fight, flight, and freeze, right? That's what keeps us in. So if we want our brain to be whole and to be working well, and for us to be regulated, the downstairs brain has to be in charge. Now, what happens when we are dysregulated is that downstairs brain flies open, and then there's nothing to hold the upstairs brain in. And so our brains go offline. We don't have the ability for logic and empathy and planning and decision making when our downstairs brain isn't holding our upstairs brain. Okay, so dysregulation is what that is. Okay, that's our body responding and us not being in control of what our body is doing. It's not defiance. It's when our children are melting down, and no amount of reasoning or consequences or instruction is going to help them until they're regulated again. Okay, so when parents come to me and they say, fix this thing, or I have this behavior and I want your support, I'm usually having to go back down to that tree and work on the roots. Okay. Now there's hope. There's hope for regulation, and I think this is what you wanted to hear a little bit about is how do we regulate with our kids? How do we help them keep the downstairs brain down here? Or when their lid is flipped and it's all out in the open, how do we bring them back down? And we have these really cool things called mirror neurons, if you've ever heard of them. They're the type of neurons in your brain that activate when you yawn and it makes me yawn, or when I cry and it makes you cry. Those are our autonomic nervous systems talking to each other. And our autonomic nervous systems talk to the people around us all the time. And for our neurodivergent kids, they feel those things deeply. And so they cannot regulate themselves in isolation. They need a co-regulator to help them keep this lid on. Okay, so they borrow their regulation from you as caregivers. And that's why we view working with children as a holistic approach, because I tell parents this too all the time, is that you as caregivers are the thermostat of your home. You set the temperature. And so if you're at a 99 degrees, you're dysregulated, things are hard right now for you, your kid is going to meet you where you're at. And they're borrowing their regulation from you. And if you're dysregulated, they're going to be dysregulated. So mirror neurons are the biological mechanisms in which we catch the emotional states of others, and why we feel like it's so important to help you as caregivers understand how to regulate your nervous systems. So then you can use your mirror neurons to co-regulate with your kids. So the tool for regulation is co-regulation. That's when we have to notice our own states as providers, as caregivers, before we intervene. Are we even regulated? And if we are, amazing. Let's lower our voices, slow our breathing, soften our body, because we have to model what we want them to see. And if they do a difficult behavior because they're dysregulated and we come in hot, what do we think is going to happen? Yeah, they're going to escalate more. That's not going to diffuse anything. And so sometimes parents are on this journey of understanding how to regulate their own nervous systems. And so they know they can't intervene. And so that's why removing yourself sometimes is the best thing you can do for your kid. Or I teach parents this tip called pilot on, pilot off, which if you've ever heard of Dr. Becky, it's not, I didn't come up with it, she came up with it. But I teach it to parents all the time, which is that sometimes you need another support person. You need a spouse, you need a partner, you need a grandparent, you need a neighbor to be able to pilot on and pilot off, so that they're not borrowing their mirror neurons from you. They're able to borrow them from somebody that is safe and calm and regulated. And the key to this is just being present. It's not perfect. This takes time to learn. And my husband and I are still on this journey with our kids. But what I've seen the most progress with the kids that I've worked with in the past 8 years, when I have gotten to a place of regulation for myself, and I'm bringing that into my therapy sessions. Dr. Dan Siegel says the parent's nervous system is the child's first home. And I believe that to be true. And we see it. It shows up in our homes with meltdowns during transitions, difficulties getting dressed, refusal to eat certain textures of foods. My daughter, it's a battle every day to get her to put her shoes on because the socks fit funny. So then what do? You go and you buy the seamless socks, and then you put those on, and then those aren't right and they fit funny. And so it's hard. And then it's like, I'm trying my best. I'm trying to help you. And then you start to get dysregulated and they cry and it's not right. It shows up in our everyday life. It's hard. I wrote on here birthday parties that end in tears, because for our daughter, if you sing the happy birthday song, it's too much attention and it causes her to cry. So these are unique things that we experience that are not everybody else does. And then at school, for our ADHD kids, right? Trouble sitting still, avoiding group work, shutting down during tests, rigidity during routines. That can all be nervous system dysregulation. And then of course at play, and that's why play therapy is so important. Okay. So we take a strengths-based approach. We want to understand what gets your kid going, what motivates them, what do they like. We can help them regulate themselves if we know what calms their body, what soothes them, what feels good to them. And a lot of the times that's understanding their strengths and gifts and capacities. And so I have these 3 images because I'm working with 3 different kids right now who these are their specialized interests. And we've got Pokemon, lining up American Girl dolls, and ripping paper. Ripping paper is my favorite right now because there is so much joy in ripping that paper. And that's what DRBIs is about. Do you have a paper ripper? Yeah, heck yeah, it is, right? Give them a little bit of Old Mail. They're going to town. Yeah, so for every kid, it's a little bit different. But if we join in on the thing that brings them joy, that's where, if we're looking at the tree, that's where the leaves start to blossom, because we have found the source that is helping them be motivated. And we don't take it away. And we don't even bring it alongside of something that we're trying to get them to do. We are just connecting with them and enjoying being with them. The learning and the fruit comes if you do that. That's what Building on Success is talking about. So in the name of a DRBI, right, the I stands for individualized differences. So none of your children are the same as my child. And none of the children in this room or the children of the parents in this room are anywhere close to being the same as the kids in the next county over. They're all different. They're all individual. And Place Park has given us another beautiful image here. They process information differently. They take it, they respond. And they're not behavioral choices that they're making, right? These are biological differences based upon the home that they're raised in, their sibling dynamic, their birth order, what is being brought to the table. So the key to helping children is to understand their individual differences and to build on their strengths. So sometimes parents come to me and they say, I want him to stop playing video games. How do I get him to stop playing video games and want to play outside? And I say, we have to start with the video games. We have to start there. We need to build motivation for him to want to spend time with you in the video games. So then we can slowly get to a place of how do we make that fun? How do we then get them to be outside with us? They're not going to want to come outside with us if we're taking away the thing that they love to then get them there. That's not how it works. So the relationship that we have with our children really matters in understanding their individual differences. And a part of individual differences is our sensory system. How am I doing on time? I'm yapping.
I'm a yapper, so I'm there with you. You're good.
Okay.
I have it that we do Q&A at like 7:20, but we got time.
All right. I'll try to speed this up for you guys. I'm so sorry. If you can tell, I'm passionate about this. So when we think about our child's individual differences, we need to understand how they process the sensory world around them. So what does their sensory system look like? And you've probably heard of the 5 big ones, which is sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch. Are those overwhelming for our kids? Are they not enough for our kids? But there are 3 more. And these are the 3 that you probably haven't heard of as much. The first being vestibular, which is your body's awareness of itself in space. So if I'm leaning back to get my hair washed, or am I freaking out? If I am freaking out when I'm leaning back to get my hair washed, odds are there's a difference in my vestibular system. Do I love swinging on swings? Is that my favorite thing to do in the entire world? There's probably a difference in your vestibular system. And then there's proprioception, which is your body's awareness of itself which is your body's awareness of pressure on its muscles and joints. So that's why you'll see kids that are crashing into things and wanting really tight squeezes and rolling themselves up into little burritos. If they're doing those things, then odds are they have a proprioceptive difference. And then interoception, and this is my favorite. There's tons of new research being done about interoception, which is our internal sensations for body signals. So how do I know that I'm tired, hungry? How do I know that I am sick or hurt? Or need to go to the bathroom. And these are some of the first signs that I see when working with a young child that is suspected to have a neurodivergence. They're late to potty train, they overeat, or they don't ever even tell us that they need to eat. And they struggle with sleep. We see that in infancy. And so interoceptive differences are one of the first things that when a family is sharing those struggles with me, when they have a little one, that I'm thinking in the back of my head, maybe there's neurodivergence happening. So think about your own kids and their sensory needs, because it matters for regulation and for treating them as a whole child. And so having a sensory system and having sensory differences doesn't mean that you have a sensory processing disorder. That just means that you're a human. And that's hard sometimes, being a human. When we start to look at sensory processing disorder, is when the sensory systems and the differences in our sensory systems are impacting our quality of life. And so usually when that's happening, you're seeing one of these up here, which is an over-responsivity to the sensory systems around them, feeling like sounds feel too loud, textures feel painful, crowded spaces feel overwhelming. For our daughter, this was absolutely the case when she was, I don't know, Patrick, how old was she? 2, maybe? 2? Yeah, some of her first words were all done, too many people. And she would sign it. She's like, all done, too many people, get me out of here. And so we would take the headphones with us everywhere. And now she wears loop headphones, which if you've never heard of those, ask me about them later. They're great. I use them too for the car rides with my neurodivergent kids. But so over-responsivity tends to be the one that parents think of the most when they think about autism, is like the good doctor, right? But there are so many other ways that our sensory system can have differences, and it can still be a sensory processing disorder, which is sensory seeking. That's when our nervous systems and our sensory systems are under responsive to input. We need so much more to regulate our nervous systems. It's mute. The world around us is going by and we're not noticing it. And so sometimes you have your couch potato kid he's fine with that. He's like, I'm good over here and I'm gonna just do my thing over here. And then sometimes you have kids that then seek it. So they're running, jumping, crashing, climbing, moving. They're doing all of that to regulate their nervous system. So we don't want to extinguish those behaviors because they're helping to calm their nervous systems. Questions about sensory processing. That can totally happen. Yeah. It's just easier to explain it this way. In fact, I do something called the sensory profile with the kids that I work with. And if you go to see an occupational therapist, you can have them do a sensory profile on your child. Not every kid is just a sensory over responder or under responder. A lot of the times they're mixed, but it's understanding, are they over responsive or under responsive in a specific category? Talking about our children's individualized differences. We talked about their nervous systems. We talked about their sensory systems, the things that they're interested in, their biological predispositions because of that. And this is something that I would assume the majority of you have not heard about, which is something called praxis and motor planning. This is big in the occupational therapy world. But praxis is the brain's ability to ideate, plan, and execute a sequence of events or actions. So most neurodivergent children really struggle with this, and their families don't know that they do. They didn't know there was a word for what this looks like. And that's why you'll see kids that have a diagnosis of level 3 be nonverbal or pre-verbal, because there's a breakdown in this praxis motor planning. And that can often be called, you can have dyspraxia. You can also have, I'm blanking on the other one, the language version of dyspraxia. I can't think of it. Apraxia. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a motor planning issue. It's a brain to body misconnection. And so for our children that are on the autism spectrum, usually the struggle is ideation, coming up with an idea. If you give them an idea, then they love the planning, right? You give them a toy, they're lining them up, they're categorizing them, they're sorting them, they've got planning on lock, right? For ADHD kids, it's the opposite. They can ideate all day. They're daydreaming. They're thinking about the beautiful things that they want to create. And then they bring it all out and it's like, oh, what do I do with this? And I was one of those kids. I was like a Barbie builder. So I had these dreams of my Barbies and what they would look like. I'd bring them out, organize them, line them up, put them in their outfits. And then I'd be like, that's it. I did it. So that was how I played with my Barbies. I wasn't having them talk to each other. That didn't make any sense to me. And until I had a friend that would maybe do it with me and model it for me, I didn't learn those skills until I saw them from friends. So ADHD and autism have different breakdowns in this motor planning process. And again, each one of your children are individualized, and they may not struggle with ideation, planning, or execution, but they may struggle with adaptation. And you can see this with them having an idea of what they want things to look like, and then you trying to say it can't happen that way, and then there's big meltdowns. So team sports can be a big one. Frustration tolerance, taking turns in a game, losing a game, that all goes into adaptation. And that's when we see major difficulties with behavior and regulation. And usually that tells me that there's an individualized difference in praxis and motor planning. And praxis actually means practice. I think it's the Latin word for practice. And so the way that we support motor planning and praxis is through repetition, doing it often and frequently. Okay. Questions about motor planning and praxis? Yeah. So that's generalization of a skill. So sometimes it's generalization of a skill from one day to the next. Sometimes it's environment, right? I can do this thing amazing at school, but then when I come home, I can't do it at all. That's a whole nother skill to be able to generalize it to a different setting. So for your child specifically, it may be generalization, but it also may mean that the skill isn't mastered, that it's an emerging skill. It isn't until we see a skill happen consistently throughout all environments that we would say that it's a mastered skill. Did you have a question? No? Okay. So strategies for support. We're nearing the end, guys. I'm bringing you home. So when we are playing with our children and interacting with them, I want you to follow their lead rather than imposing our own agenda for what play looks like or for what our interactions need to be. I want you to think about the things that they're interested in, meet them where they're at in those. Okay. That's where we build respect and trust, and we can build on their strengths. Finding their natural curiosity and intrinsic motivation that we need for engagement and social communication and executive functioning. And I say that all play is okay. So if your child's version of play is ripping up paper and it's not hurting anybody else and it's not damaging property, right, or hurting themselves, then if it's play and there's shared enjoyment, then we want to lean into that. We need to understand what is the purpose of play. The purpose of play is to have shared enjoyment and for learning to happen. And if that can happen with ripping paper, or if that can happen with hiding shoes around the house, then let's lean into it. And then connection before compliance. So if you want your child to do something, we need to connect with them first. I mean, even think about your marriages, right? You don't just go up to somebody and say, your husband, I'm thinking about mine, and say like, I need you to take the trash out right now, right? I may walk over and say, how was your day? Oh, it's nice. I love you. Would you mind taking the trash out for me, right? It's going to help our relationship more if I don't just see him as a means to my end. So practical takeaways should be that we need to regulate ourselves first. We need to get curious about the behaviors that our kids have. What are they trying to communicate to us? And we need to join in before we lead. So what I don't want you to do is to say, come here, Jimmy, we're playing puzzles. And this is what a puzzle looks like. And put them in and take them out. Or we're going to build with magnet tiles. We're going to build a castle. That's what we're going to do. No, I want you to see what they come up with and join in on their play. So you are shaping a nervous system through relationship. Every interaction, every moment of attunement, every choice to understand rather than just to correct your child, these are what shapes their nervous system. Dan Siegel says the parent's nervous system is the child's first home. Peggy O'Mara says the way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice. Brene Brown says connection is the fuel for courage. Those are all so true. And this understanding is not just theoretical. It's a call to action and a moment of reflection of how we parent our kids, how we take care of ourselves as caregivers, and how we help build safety, resilience, and self-acceptance. So that's my presentation. And then if you'd like, I can address the pre-submitted questions and then share a little bit about what we do at PGW. And then we can open up the floor for questions that you have in the room. How's that sound? Okay. Or how much time do we have left? Okay, good. So the first question that was submitted, which is what age is appropriate to talk to your child about their diagnosis? So what I would say is that it depends on their developmental capacities. So if we're looking at that trunk, right, and you can go back and look and find the image online. It's called Dr. Greenspan's The Learning Tree. I want you to look and see where they're at as far as their functional developmental capacities. It shouldn't be an age. It shouldn't be, oh, at age 5 you can tell them, because my child's age 5 may look different than your child's age 5. And so we need to understand where they're at, what they can understand, and then are they regulated enough to have that conversation? Storytelling is a great way to talk about a diagnosis. I have some great books that I could recommend. Play is another really great way, right? You're getting out some characters that they love, and we're talking through what their experience is like. Having them meet with peers that have similar diagnoses. All those things can be helpful, but I wouldn't say that it's an age. I would say that it's a developmental capacity, and I'm happy to help guide you based upon your specific child. How to address the emotional and mental impact of bullying with a child who has anxiety and ADHD. This is huge. So many of our neurodivergent kids are experiencing bullying, and it's really hard to see. My daughter, this is not really quite a bullying scenario, but she has this selective mutism. She's in preschool and she's starting to talk at school. And it was, through all of her amazing therapies that she's done, she's starting to talk at school. It's amazing. And so she decides she's going to go up to a friend on the playground and ask them, do you want to be my friend? And the little girl looked at her and she said, nope, I have enough friends. I know. And I was like, right? That was so hard, not only for her, but for me as a parent. Like, how, when they work so hard to get to this and they're met with this, like, it's devastating. And it does affect them and their mental health. So I would say that making sure that you have the right supports and your child is meeting with the right type of interventionist and therapist, you yourself is meeting with the right type of intervention and therapist, to be able to address the nuances of bullying and the mental impact specific to your child. But it is so hard and it's real, and we want to make sure we address it, be proactive rather than reactive. How are we building our child's sense of self, what they believe to be true about themselves? Because if they believe themselves to look like this, and then somebody comes and says, you're this, they can turn around and say, no, I'm not, right? Like, if a kid says, you stink, and they don't think they stink, they can say, well, that's just not true, right? But they have to believe that about themselves. And if they don't have a good sense of self, and purpose and understanding of their place in the world, then the bullying is going to be really hard to overcome. How to appropriately address meltdowns and tantrums. I think that I want you to address them as the behavior being a form of communication. So what are they trying to communicate, and working back from there. I do that in parent coaching. That's what I specialize in, is understanding meltdowns and tantrums and behaviors, and help to support families based upon that. So if you're thinking of a specific one, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, but think about those meltdowns and tantrums as a form of communication. And that doesn't mean that every behavior is something that we just want to let happen. That's not true either. I'm not saying that. As parents, we need to have firm guidelines and boundaries to help support our kids, and expectations and household rules. Those things are important, because meltdowns, really, when I see that word, I think of emotional dysregulation, nervous system dysregulation. Tantrums can sometimes be, I want this thing and I didn't get it. So there is still room for there to be boundaries and guidelines within that. And then how to find balance with overstimulation. Yeah, I'm still figuring this one out myself. And if you have a really great answer, you let me know. But I do think that finding the right therapist and the right supports to help you understand your own needs and how to cope, and to give you strategies to find the resources around you, to be a part of a community, so that you can pilot on, pilot off, is huge. So those were those questions. Anybody else have major questions that they would like to ask before I kind of talk a little bit about what we do at PGW? Okay. So yeah, Purposeful Growth and Wellness, like I mentioned, is a clinical mental health practice, private practice that was owned by our very own Sarah. And it's through PGW, we have couples therapy, individual therapy, art therapy, CBT, DBT, all of those different types of interventions to support you as caregivers, and some of your children too. We then built off of that to the Neurodivergence Discovery Clinic, where we do school advocacy and IEP planning, Floortime as the play-based intervention, parent coaching, and then we do the autism and ADHD assessment and evaluation process too, in a neuroaffirming way. So when you guys were asking those questions a little bit earlier about girls, we have a very unique perspective that we're taking through this assessment and evaluation process to make sure that our twice exceptional kids, our girls, our high masking kids, our dual diagnosis ADHD and autism kids aren't getting missed. And we're able to do that because it's a privatized medical evaluation rather than just going through the hospital setting. And it can look like what we want it to look like and what we've built it specifically to be, because I've done it in those other settings and I know what families need. And so those are the services that we have. We'd love to talk to you today if you have any questions or interest in any of them. We're working on building a nonprofit to hopefully help support financially families in need, so that this becomes a really accessible resource to all families. But it's something that takes time and we're working on it. So that's a little bit about us. There's tons of informational flyers over there, books that from my personal library that I recommend that you're more than welcome to take a picture of. We have fidgets, take one home for your kids, a pen. And I'm so happy that you were able to be here with me today. And it feels good to know that I'm not alone, that you're here too, and that we're doing this all together. So thank you.